Uh, my name is Nasser from DAC. Welcome to our webinar today on why brand and performance marketing will have to come closer together in 2020. I'm delighted that we have an international audience joining us with people from domestically in the US, Canada, the UK, Spain and France who have registered, and I'm seeing a number of you on the line already. For those on the West Coast, thank you for getting in early and joining us. I'm delighted to be joined by Colin Colburn. So for those who don't know me, I lead client strategy here at DAC. I'm responsible for the strategic function, insights, and so on. But more importantly is our guest and the person who's going to be delivering the majority of the content today, and that is Colin Colburn. So Colin is an analyst on the B2C marketing team at Forrester. His research focuses on current and future trends in search and discovery marketing, and he helps Forrester clients understand how consumers find brands and information and what strategies and technologies marketers can leverage to make themselves discoverable. His research topics include strategies and best practices for Amazon advertising, voice search, search engine optimization, and paid search advertising. Colin's research and analysis is frequently cited in publications such as Search Engine Land, Digiday, Media Post, The Drum, and The Wall Street Journal. Welcome, Colin. Thank you for taking the time. And with that, I'll hand it over to you.
Yeah, thanks very much, Nasser. And good morning, good afternoon to everyone joining us today. Really excited to be here talking about two sort of topics that are often talked about in silos or in two different ways, but we're going to talk about both of them head on today. So to start, I want to sort of level set around what we're talking about when we say brand or performance marketing. Brand marketing, I tend to think of as being a really great tool or lever for marketers to use to fill up the funnel, to create demand for a product or service that they're trying to market and sell to consumers. Performance marketing, on the other hand, is really great at converting that demand, at doing some of the lower funnel acquisition and purchase-driven kinds of targeting, and really driving revenue, driving sales, driving leads for the business. Now, the reason that these two areas are often talked about in silos is because of exactly what I just described there, is that they're focused on two different parts of the customer life cycle, two different parts of the marketing funnel. You think about brand marketing, and it's often heavily used to influence things like awareness of a product, of a brand. It's also a good lever to use to help with the perception of a brand or a product, or even to tell a story about what is your brand's North Star, what are you trying to position yourself as in the marketplace. And performance marketing is much more focused on direct conversions, on direct response, click and buy sort of metrics. So they're often competing with one another for things like budget, for things like resources within an organization. Many companies even have different agencies that they're using for brand versus performance. But the key here is the middle ground where these two overlap and where they complement each other. And that's really what I want to focus on most today, is where is there overlap between these two areas, and where can we increase that overlap so that we can bring them closer together? Because there are forces in the landscape, in the market today, that are going to make marketers have to bring these two things closer together. Before we get into what I think is going to happen to force them together, I want to talk a little bit about where have we come from. And I think that it's really important to note that advanced measurement techniques have really changed the way that marketers think about brand and performance marketing. In fact, performance, I would argue, has really gained an edge because of these more advanced techniques. You look at something like marketing mix modeling, for example. Really, it arose to answer consumer packaged goods companies' needs to justify their big brand budgets. These companies have always spent a lot of money on branding efforts. And in order to better understand or to even make the business case for why the company needs to spend so much in brand marketing, mixed models came up to really give a sense for what were the different levers that influence consumers, and what should your overall media mix look like based on the levers that you learned about in the model. Fast forward a little bit, and actually not even really a fast forward, but around the same time, really rich customer transaction data at companies like retailers or financial services firms. That rich customer data that they have fueled a range of analytics tools, not just marketing performance tools, but also things like customer segmentation, next best offer capabilities, valuations around customer lifetime value. These all arose along with attribution models to really take advantage of that rich data to get a sense for what are all of the different pieces that are contributing to a purchase that a customer eventually makes. And you can see here from the data that we have from our global state of customer analytics survey that a lot of marketers are using these types of analytic techniques. And if they are not using them already, they're planning to implement them going forward. And I would argue that performance marketing has really benefited most from these models because they tend to compensate better performance style vehicles like paid search versus branding tools, because the data is just not as quantifiable. Really, is sort of the reasoning for that. With that said, I think that in 2020 and entering a new decade, there is going to be forces that will emerge that are going to make marketers reevaluate this thinking of brand versus performance, and even rethinking their measurement techniques going forward. A couple of reasons for that. I mean, you just look at the consumer landscape today. Technology has really been the radical change that has influenced the way that people live, work, and spend. The power of information has changed. It's much more in the consumer hands. There's increasing expectations for how companies are going to communicate and serve with consumers because of that. The age of the customer, something that Forrester talks a lot about, really gets to the heart of consumers being empowered, connected, and really faced with more choices than they ever have been before. So they really are in control of so much of what goes on in the market today than ever before. And you add on top of that the media landscape really being super fragmented compared to just 10, 15 years ago. If you think about how many different forms of media you use throughout the day, it's kind of amazing. You think about waking up, most people checking some form of social media, going to work, checking the news, listening to the radio or other forms of media. Once you're at work, you're using media in some way, I'm sure, whether you're supposed to or not supposed to. Thinking about your commute home, whether you're listening to podcasts, preparing for the night, whether it's food related or going out. And then finally, once you're at home, there's even more media to choose from to really consume and enjoy and relax. The downside to this as a consumer is that we tend to interact with so many forms of these media every day that we're bombarded by messages from marketers, from ads, and that's really led to the major downside from a marketing perspective, which is that consumers in general, tend to avoid ads. And you look at all of the different mediums that we have here from when we ask consumers what best describes the behavior you see or you demonstrate when you see or hear this type of advertising. Things like ads on websites, ads in search results, direct mail ads even, people saying they generally ignore those types of advertising. And if you actually look at the bottom here of this chart, that's actually where I think things are most interesting, is that you have a lot of offline media, things that have typically been used for brand marketing, like ads in magazines or even outdoor ads, as forms of media that people are saying they're more willing to not avoid. And that's really interesting to me because that means that the branding aspect is pretty powerful still in terms of being able to get a message out there about your brand or about your product. I want to get into some of the big forces that we're predicting will impact brand marketing and performance marketing in 2020. There's really 4 predictions that I have that I think are going to most affect this world today. First is around subscription fatigue. Now, you might be thinking, what is he talking about? What I'm saying here is that I think consumers are going to hit a point this year where they realize, man, I'm spending a lot on things like streaming services, things like media publications, music subscriptions too. I think what we're going to see is that consumers are going to start to look at their wallets and say to themselves, do I really need all of these services? Do I need all of these subscriptions? And for the ones that say that, yes, I do need it, I think there's going to be a little bit of consumer backlash on those companies to sort of force them to provide services that connect across all of these disparate subscriptions. I want to look at one really popular area of subscriptions today, which is around streaming services. You look at how many streaming services are available today and will be available in the coming future. There are so many of them. And there are going to be winners and losers in this landscape because there's just so many of them that some are gonna rise to the top and others will end up falling and potentially going away. But the real impact here is actually going to be what that effect is going to have on marketers. And looking at one particular streaming service in particular, someone like Netflix, we're not thinking Netflix is going to become an ad-supported platform. I still think that they'll be an ad-free platform. But Netflix will instead redefine advertising and the opportunity behind advertising for them by doubling their investment in things like product placements and other creative integrations with brands. We already see this happening. Marketers are starting to turn to these clever activations to connect with consumers in more authentic or memorable ways. You look at companies like Burger King or even Coke, they're already doing this with Netflix today to some degree of success. So this is really a good branding vehicle to be able to get your product, get your service into the homes of consumers in a way that is not disruptive, that is not going to make them immediately avoid even consuming or engaging with that form of advertising. The second area where I think there's going to be some movement here is around podcasts. So I would actually argue that I believe podcasts are sort of the next big media market. You look at podcast ad spend by the IAB. Podcast ad spend topped $400 million in 2018, according to the IAB. It could easily top $1 billion by the end of 2020 is my prediction. There's a couple of reasons why I think that. Number one is that consumers are spending a lot of time listening to podcasts. Spotify, as just one podcast platform, Spotify saw a 250% year-over-year increase in podcast consumption hours just from 2017 to 2018. That's a huge increase. And even Forrester's data confirms this. We've seen that the average consumer spends about 3 hours per week listening to online audio content. The second reason is that there's tons of supply. So there are plenty of podcasts that are out there. A company like Music Oomph, they report that there's currently 700,000 active podcasts with over 29 million episodes. So there's plenty of inventory for advertisers to advertise on. And then the last thing, and this is probably the most compelling reason, is that the people that tend to listen to podcasts are super valuable to marketers. Podcast listeners tend to be 45% more likely to have household income of $250,000 or more. So these are really highly engaged, high income users that are really an opportunity for marketers to get in front of in a non-disruptive way too, because very often the host is the one that is reading the ad, not just as a a new form of content that is immediately injected that is so obviously not part of the content that you're listening to. The third area that's going to impact brand and performance is actually a really interesting one. We're predicting that every US retailer will want to get in on advertising. They'll want to build out an advertising revenue stream the way that Amazon has over the past couple of years. And the reason that this is interesting from a branding and performance perspective is because most marketers are using Amazon advertising in the CPG industry. And it's really changed the way that CPGs are thinking about brand and performance. Like I said before, CPGs have historically spent tons and tons of money behind brand marketing. And now they're getting a taste of performance-based marketing, kind of click and buy direct response advertising. And it's changing the way that they're budgeting and their strategy behind their marketing. So why do we think that other retailers are going to get in on this? Well, if you look at Amazon's ad revenue, it's substantially growing. I mean, this is just from 2015 to 2018. You can see a really steady increase from just north of $1 billion to over a $10 billion ad business that they have. And you can see that net income, which would be a proxy for profit, has gone up right with it. So any retailer is going to be looking at this and saying, yes, I absolutely want in on this. So what we're specifically predicting is that any retailer that has over 50 million monthly site visitors is going to build out their own self-serve ad tools for brands, or partner with ad tech firms like Criteo Retail Media or service providers like Triad Retail Media to monetize the traffic that they see on their sites. And I wouldn't expect that the ad opportunity for retailers is going to stop at the website. This is another interesting area where brand and performance are coming together, I think. I would expect more ads within the store. So retailers are going to try to better monetize their physical properties. I've already seen this happen. Walgreens recently announced that they're putting technology into 2,500 of their locations with digital screens on the coolers that advertisers can in real time place ads against, depending on factors of who's in front of the cooler, how many people, what kind of products are even in the cooler that they can advertise against. And then lastly, the last prediction that I think is going to affect all of this is that we're seeing that budgets within marketing organizations are shifting from agency content creation fees to influencer investments, as influencers are becoming an increasingly popular way and a really low-cost way for marketers to authentically create forms of content for their consumers. One major US retailer that parted ways with its creative agency recently said to us that it was amazing how much and how diverse quality creative can be with the budget that they're putting into influencers. And then another good one is from Estee Lauder. Their CEO on their Q2 2019 earnings call said that 75% of their investment in marketing is now in digital social media influencers, and they're finding that it's actually very productive for them to do that. So in the event of an economic downturn, I think this is an area where marketers are going to look to influencers to almost be like outsourcers for creative and for content for them. And where we're seeing this happen most on the influencer side is actually around different forms of influencers, not the Kylie Jenners of the world. You see micro influencers coming up more, so influencers that have a more niche audience to reach specific consumers as a way to engage your brand through this niche audience. You're also seeing non-influencers and non-human influencers also come up as a range of partners for marketers to choose from, because it's all about for most of these marketers that have used influencers for a while, while, they're more focused now than ever on authentic engagement. That's been one of the challenges with the influencer space for a while, is that the concerns over authenticity, over how much are we going to engage users, but also not piss them off at the same time. And they're finding that some of these non-influencers are a good way to be able to do that. So I want to leave us with a couple of recommendations based on a lot of those things that we see going on in the landscape today. I think that first and foremost is that in order to drive alignment between these two areas of brand and performance, I think we really have to focus on that overlap. And where we can focus on that overlap more tactically is within the performance realm. I think we actually need to think about, how does performance marketing vehicles like paid search, for instance, how does that drive brand? And at the same time, how do your branded campaigns, how are they driving performance? I think that we always focus so much on everything in marketing needs to be directly tied back to a hard business objective. And I am all for that. But at the same time, I actually think we need to know how performance campaigns that are often very easily tied to business objectives. We also need to know the branding impact that those campaigns have. And I think by doing this on both sides of the equation will actually help with bringing these teams a little bit closer together. The second thing that I would recommend is innovating and iterating on your overall digital marketing strategy, not being afraid to test things out. You look at some emerging marketing channels, for instance, like audio advertising, like SMS messaging, or even using messaging apps. If you're one of these marketers who on the performance side has maxed out on performance, you're starting to hit that point of diminishing returns, I think it's time to start considering, what are some of the channels that our customers are using in their overall journey, and how can we create either paid, earned, or owned experiences in these new channels to potentially increase performance, both in these emerging channels and potentially even in the existing channels that we're using. And then another facet of this is to look at, how can you localize the national marketing efforts that you already have underway? How can you bring down your campaigns into a specific region, state, city, zip, and localize those efforts from content to the ad strategy, so that you're serving customers in a particular region the most accurate and also most authentic information for them, based on the needs that they have, whether they're on the go or they're just purchasing within a specific area that has a certain niche to it. And then the third thing that I would recommend is, and this is a topic of conversation I feel like that I'm having every single day now, which is the end of the cookie. And it's so important for marketers to start preparing for this future, because it's been such an ingrained part in digital advertising. And my recommendation here is that to start getting comfortable with contextual targeting. This is something that I think brand marketers have done a great job around, is really being honed in on what is the content or what is the context with which we're going to place our marketing messages or our ads against. And I think performance has kind of gotten in the way of that. It's been so focused on things like retargeting, things like using audience behavioral data to tailor or target marketers or target consumers with messages that we think they might be that might resonate best, but sometimes it just falls flat because of the context not being right. So I think this is another area where these two teams can come a little bit closer together, which is figuring out, what does contextual targeting look like from a brand perspective, and what does it need to look like from a performance perspective? And then finally, and this is sort of the underpinning, big recommendation across all of these predictions, all of these recommendations, is really bringing a unified marketing measurement approach to your organization. So this is bringing together marketing mix modeling and marketing attribution measurement together in a way where we can get a better understanding of the total marketing effectiveness of all of our programs, whether they are brand programs, whether they are performance programs, whether they're programs that are online or offline, or even trying to drive in-store traffic or drive digital traffic. Just changing the mindset is step number one here, is thinking about how can we bring all of our measurement tools and capabilities better together so that we can get a holistic understanding of what's happening across all of our touch points, across all of our purchasing paths as well. So I know that's a lot, but I'm gonna pass it over to Nasser. I know he has a little bit of stuff to walk through, and then we're gonna take. I'm sure many of you have questions. I'm gonna take some of those questions.
For sure. Thank you very much, Colin. I'll be illustrating a lot of what Colin has talked about with two very specific use cases. Before I do so, just as an aside, Colin, I think you've aged yourself there. I think what's her name? Kylie Jenner is about 2018. Cool influencers out there now. So the first use case I wanted to share that talks about the alignment of brand and performance marketing is a really incredible story. It's a legacy brand called Vera Bradley. So for those people who aren't familiar with Vera Bradley, this is an American retail brand. That is in the women's accessories space, so handbags and that kind of thing. They've been around for a very long time, very broad audience, but they had ended up in an interesting situation where they were trying to pivot into and transform into much more of a digital and data-driven organization. At the same time, kind of overhauling their product line, and making it very relevant to grow with new audiences, while also trying to push much more of or get away from a discount-driven strategy from a retail perspective. So what this meant was, first of all, really understanding who their current audiences were, building out these personas in a very data-driven way, utilizing first and third-party data, combining them, building out the user journeys, and then building out a KPI framework that really helped understand what the different expectations were from each individual media channel. And this was really important because this was the combination of brand and performance marketing in a very audience-driven way. So as they went out to build audience, they wanted to ensure that they were reaching those people with messaging that was going to resonate. This was very much built on third-party data as opposed to first-party. And there's all kinds of data sources that we would be delighted to talk about in terms of follow-ups. But what's really important here is that we built out a KPI framework that basically said, this is a full funnel approach. As we approach each of these individual audiences in the different regions, here's what the KPIs are going to be at each stage of that consumer journey, connected in a very data-driven way, so that we can not just reach these people with awareness messaging, but also engage with them through content in a meaningful way through the various platforms and channels, and then ultimately convert them in an extremely efficient way. This initiative in 2019 won Best Global E-Commerce Campaign, but what's also really interesting is where they ended up from a revenue perspective, which was at about 20% ahead of their goal, which was a spectacular achievement, and very much based around doing a lot of the things that Colin was talking about in terms of testing out new channels and platforms, but doing it through a unified data framework and with a deep understanding of audience and aligning content and media in a very deliberate way. The second use case that I wanted to share with you is a global tire brand. Unfortunately, I can't share the name, but they are one of the biggest out there. This is an engagement that in the last 2 years saw the unification of their brand and performance-focused efforts. So these were very much seen as distinct for a very, very long period of time, have always been distinct groups inside of the organization with their own org structures and their very, very disparate and disjointed goals. as part of this engagement, these goals were unified. These budgets and effort were unified, not necessarily around the goals of the lines of business, but rather around user and consumer audience profiles. This allowed a full funnel approach and the unification of brand and performance media and marketing efforts, which, as you can see, led to incredible impact on a neutral budget from an investment perspective. And I think what's really important here is when we're talking about things like tires, this is a commodity. A lot of consumers invest in tires because they have to, and this is a premium brand in that space. So this approach that allowed them to drive or align brand advertising with in-store outcomes, because this is not an e-commerce driven brand, but people had to go into physical locations with a highly localized approach at scale across the country, was able to really help drive the business in a way that they hadn't seen before. And absolutely central to that was this alignment of brand and performance marketing, both inside the organization as well as how they restructured their agency relationships, their content experiences, and so on. So those are the two use cases that I thought would be really good to illustrate how the impact of the sorts of things that Colin was talking about, how they impact businesses today. Please, guys, there is a question panel. If you have questions, please drop them in. I can see a few of them coming in, but I'm going to be super selfish and start with my own question. So, Colin, you mentioned and you touched on this idea of the death of the cookie. There's a lot of conversation about that. Could you talk a little bit about some ways that brands can take this into account within the context of the importance of connecting brand and performance, given that data is the central connective tissue between these two areas?
Yeah, I think that I think step number one, if you're a brand, is to reach out to your partners that you're leveraging data from, and I think it's time to start poking holes a little bit in what they're trying to do. Like, where, if you're using someone like a retargeter, if you're using a data management platform, if you're using, even, the Google marketing platform stack, it's time to start asking whether you're a brand marketer or a performance marketer, what are they doing to prepare for this? And how is it going to change the operations that you're running with them today and in 2 to 3 years from now? I think that's sort of step number one. And then I think step number two is to, I actually, and I don't mean this in a disparaging way at all, but I think it's time to go back to marketing fundamentals. And if you're a digital marketer, if you're a traditional marketer, I think it's time to start learning about both. I think we need more people in the industry that are proficient in both traditional offline, branded, if you will, marketing, and digital marketers. I think we need to have people that can do both of these things. They cannot be separated forever. And I think something like the death of the cookie is going to force brands to bring online and offline a little bit closer together, because it's a great way to build up your first party data of whatever is happening, in physical locations or in offline channels, with what's happening in digital ones too. I think those things are going to have to come together to kind of get a better sense of who is this customer, what do they look like, and then from there being able to align media strategy regardless of whether it's going to be a branded campaign or a performance campaign.
Thank you, Colin. I think this is a really important area. In fact, our VP of Media, Jenna Watson, had recently written a post on our blog on digital advertising in a cookieless future. Please, guys, go take a look at this. It's available right there on the website, and she has some really interesting insights. But I would add one component. You touched on this point about first-party data and the increased importance of first-party data in this kind of cookieless environment. I think that really understanding fundamentally what the brand means to people, what the brand voice is, how it differentiates in the marketplace, and how that aligns with the various audience groups that are out there, both in terms of core audiences as well as growth audiences, at the local level and so on, is going to be critically important. So building experiences whereby you're delivering value to these audiences in exchange for their first party data is going to be increasingly important. Spray and pray approach isn't going to work anymore. Looking at this in a really siloed way between brand and performance just isn't going to work anymore in terms of having people allow you to access or have access to their first party data. I think that's a really important element here. Okay, so one other question that's come in. Do you have a recommendation on how to evaluate whether performance marketing, like paid search, for example, is moving the needle on brand?
Yeah, so this is one area where a financial services company that I recently spoke with is doing some interesting stuff. They're actually, I mean, this is an interesting conversation to bring up, but they are working with Google actually on brand lift studies based on their paid search campaigns to get a better sense for when they're running paid search campaigns for specific categories or topics or keywords, is that resonating with people in terms of thinking about the brand associated with those topics or categories. I thought that was a really clever way of thinking about, in a very competitive arena like financial services. Some of the keywords within financial services are the most expensive keywords in all of paid search. And yes, they're looking at things very closely from an ROI, revenue leads perspective. But I think there's a really important and also valuable way to look at brand from that perspective too. If you're going to be spending all of this money in paid search, you might want to know not only what is the immediate direct revenue impact today, but what is the impact on the way that people perceive or think about your brand going forward. And that was sort of the approach that company was taking. And I think that's there's pros and cons of working with Google on that sort of thing directly, but I think it was a really smart tactic to use to really get a full sense of what is the total impact of the investment that we're making within paid search.
I think that's a really neat approach, and yes, I think I'm sitting here smiling at the idea of Google telling you that paid search works. But that aside, if we want to set aside any latent skepticism there, I think it speaks to an interesting element around how to view branded search. So a lot of marketers, and I think this has been the case more in the past than perhaps hopefully today. But a lot of marketers will kind of boost their branded search and say, well, I'm doing my job. Look at this amazing return on ad spend. And it's like, yeah, but you're capturing demand. I think it's important to spend on brand, on branded advertising and branded search. It's critically important, but there are schools of thought that suggest that branded search is not search. That demand was created by other activities, whether it's other search endeavors in terms of the unbranded stuff, and what you're doing is you're capturing the demand in a very efficient way, an effective way through the branded search, but it's a good way of understanding the impact of other channels, assuming you have those attribution models and the data frameworks to allow you to say, yes, we did social upfront, and that then drove greater branded inquiries.
I couldn't agree more. I think when it comes to branded keywords, there's really two reasons to use branded keywords. One is to fend off conquesting by competitors. So if competitors are buying your keyword terms, that's totally a valid reason to be buying your own branded ones, because you want to try and remove them from coming up, especially in mobile searches where it's so prevalent, those first listings being paid search links. The second reason is to instill a message behind the brand that you're trying to drive. So more of a perception kind of tactic of if you have negative press around your brand, or if there's just general negative content around your brand within search results, and you want to drive home a point about a piece of that negative content, or even just try to drive it down the page, that is another reason to use branded keywords within paid search. Outside of those two areas, there is valid reason. However, from my perspective, I don't think they're always the most efficient reasons. And it gets to exactly what you're just saying, Nasser, which is that you're already capturing that demand in most of the searches that are being done. If people are searching directly for you know Purina puppy chow, it's pretty obvious that they're a consumer, an existing customer, or at least one that is definitely going to want to buy Purina Puppy Chow right now. So those, again, if it's around conquesting or if it's around driving a perception or a message, those are two very, very smart and savvy reasons to be using branded keywords. Outside of that, sometimes I have major concerns about how efficient actually are those dollars being used.
Understood. So we've talked a little bit about, we've had a bit of a retail focus in terms of some of the conversation. Do you have any thoughts about B2B or service examples? What those plans might look like, and the alignment of brand and performance where it's not necessarily retail?
Yeah, so in some of those industries, like B2B, for instance, it's a little bit. I think it's a little bit more nuanced because you are using so many different, things like channel marketing, for instance, that have both branding impact and performance impact. So I actually think for companies in the B2B industry, there is a lot of opportunity in the performance space, especially as more buyers are going online to do research. That you're dealing with a more informed buyer as a B2B company than ever before, especially if you're a B2B salesperson. And I think there's actually a lot of opportunity in the space to get in front of those buyers earlier, whether they are searching, whether they are using, even things like LinkedIn, for instance, as a way to do some of their research before even contacting a company. So that to me, I think is kind of the opportunity, for those kinds of companies, is to really lean in on the performance kinds of levers and see how they can better influence and better inform the buyer before they're even getting into some of the offline channels.
Yeah, B2B and service-based industries, I think, are interesting in that, often there isn't a physical product, and often it's a long considered purchase. And those long considered purchases imply a need to really understand that customer journey and stay in contact over an extended period of time. That can only happen with deep understanding what that customer journey actually looks like, what that buying behavior looks like, and absolute clarity around what your messaging is going to be at each stage of that customer journey, from an awareness brand perspective, and carrying it all the way through into not just the acquisition, but also into retention and growth. And doing this in a very efficient way through utilization of data, ideally first-party data, to ensure that people are connecting with content, engaging with it, and ultimately converting. And actually, that brings me to a thought about engagement as a measure, and its potential impact in terms of performance marketing. So as we think about emergence of AI platforms, auto optimization, all of those kinds of things that are increasingly coming to the fore, what are the search engines and social platforms and tech platforms using to determine what that type of auto optimization needs to look like? And I think there's a lot of argument to be made that it's about how they're engaging, how individuals are engaging with your brand content. Could you perhaps speak a little bit about that, Colin?
Yeah, I think that this is an area that's really interesting because you look at what Google, Facebook, the major ad platforms are doing. They're using a lot more of their machine learning behind everything today. I'm doing a bunch of research right now in the mobile ad space and in some of the emerging marketing channel space too. And what I'm finding is that advertisers are sort of expecting every platform to have AI-backed, machine learning-backed algorithms, learning capabilities, even sometimes creative or content production capabilities behind the under the hood for them to kind of offload. So that to me has some really interesting has some interesting I guess evolutionary pieces as you think about the marketing ecosystem and the platforms that are that are out there going forward. They're going to have to provide a deeper level of support to be able to allow the marketer to offload some resources and capabilities that they just might not have internally. What I think is actually going to be very interesting to look at is one of my recommendations is around contextual targeting, which is how good are the major ad platforms going to be at being able to understand context when they're building out machine learning algorithms for placement. That'll be a very interesting avenue to look down because they're already starting to do this to some degree, and to some success, some not so good success. I just talked to a marketer yesterday who was telling me that his biggest concern when it comes to social advertising is that it is not contextually relevant often. Because he feels that their creative has not been aligned with the overall feed experience or the story experience that consumers are consuming in social platforms. So someone like a Facebook would be very wise to figure out how can we help that particular advertiser place this ad in the feed that is going to be most useful and contextual to the user that we're targeting.
So let's talk about contextual targeting in the context of a question that we have about driving people into physical locations,
Mm.
and how do we make that more contextually appealing? How do we make it more contextually relevant in terms of brand and performance marketing to achieve that outcome?
Yeah, I think it really comes down to in the planning portion of these campaigns, really getting deep into insights on a local level and being able to really understand what are the factors that are contributing to someone going into a physical location. Like how big of a impact does something like social, something like search have on people going to visit a store location. And I think that will then help with some of the creative and content and copywriting pieces of the ads or the messages or the social posts that a company then creates. If someone is really, if one of the insights is that, yeah, people really come to our location based on urgent need, that can help with, in a paid search ad with a lot of the copy or the calls to action that are associated with it. You leveraging something like directions or click to call within that paid search ad would actually be really smart and contextual to what we know about the average user that comes and visits our location. So I think things like that in the planning phase is really where contextual targeting, I think, takes off and gets very useful and very helpful to solving a customer problem.
I think that's great insight. And I think an element to add to that is, that final mile in the digital experience where people are actively looking to go into a physical location, that's often overlooked from a brand perspective. And the experiences that are built barely qualify as experiences. They're viewed by a lot of brands. Often they're an IT function around, is our data correct? It's like, yeah, it's correct, but it's not exactly a compelling brand experience built around a local audience. So I think understanding that final mile in the in that customer journey needs to be consistent with all of the experience and messaging that's happened up to that point, is a really important piece.
Yeah.
One final question that's come in, and it goes back to your point around Walmart, and I think I want to perhaps talk about this in a broader sense around marketplaces in the main. So certainly we've seen this either with Kroger or north of the border with I think it's Loblaw is announced a marketplace creation. We're seeing this certainly in Asia with a lot of their marketplaces that have grown, whether it's Alibaba or inside of the messaging apps. Could you talk a little bit about how this is growing internationally beyond the United States, and what potential barriers retailers may have in creating brand and performance focused platforms for advertisers that are compelling?
Yeah, I would say internationally it's growing just as much as it is in the US. I can just tell you anecdotally from the questions that we are getting from clients globally. We're seeing a spike in questions across the globe as it relates to marketplace platforms where they can advertise on. So the Mercado Libres, the Alibabas of the world are coming up more with our clients in terms of they want to know, how is their platform from an advertising perspective? How is it comparable to what Amazon is doing, to what we're doing within Google, what we're doing in Facebook? So definitely growing. And then the second piece that I would add on here is that, this will be a really interesting area to watch if more players enter the space, like we're predicting. Does that increase overall competition for digital advertising, or is this really just about bringing shopper marketing, trade marketing dollars online? Like, do these retailers like Walmart, who are pretty significant in size, are they able to bring in dollars from performance media? Are they bringing dollars that are being spent on things like Google into their business, or is it really just sort of cannibalization of what they're getting from an offline perspective and now going online? I have a feeling that what we are going to see is more dollars from some performance campaigns being moved into testing within the marketplace ad platforms. A big challenge for for Amazon in particular, this is one that I'm most knowledgeable of. Amazon's really struggled to attract branding dollars into the platform. Dollars that are specifically used to target people that might not be looking to buy right now. Because that's all we tend to think about Amazon as is just a, you go there when you want to purchase. But the reality is that there's an increasing user base that is using Amazon just as a research and discovery tool. So I think that will be an interesting evolution to see if advertisers do start to think of marketplaces as more than just a performance vehicle, because right now they really are just thinking of it that way.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Colin, and thank you very much for all of the original research and insight predictions that you shared with the audience today. This webinar has been recorded and will be available to be kind of reviewed and shared, perhaps to help you internally, those people who are listening in, with helping to break down the silos and barriers internally to better align performance and brand marketing. As I mentioned, there is that blog post on the DAC blog that my good friend and colleague Jenna Watson had recently written on the impending death of the cookie and what to do about it. Please do check it out. It's a really good resource that's bringing together a lot of progressive thinking about this. Thank you to the team that have helped put this together and promote it, and thank you to everybody for taking the time out of your very busy days. Have a great rest of your day. Bye-bye.